Fnaf, Five Nights at Freddy's, the scary bear game with child murder. We've all heard of it. Now, one of the biggest draws to the franchise, to me anyway, is the lore, the story behind it. And the short version of this lore goes a little something like this. Henry Emily and William Afton, a pair of business partners, opened some restaurants in the early 80s. Sort of think along the lines of Chuck E. Cheese and, the Rockafire explosion. Animatronic bands, pizza places, got arcades, you get the gist of it. Afton, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, murders several children, including Henry's daughter Charlotte, aka Charlie. The animatronics get possessed by a spirit of the dead children, after William Afton, stuffs the bodies into them. And while all of this is going on, Afton's own children end up dying all in horrific ways. William gets spring-locked while being confronted by his victims, and of course his son Michael returns from the dead to hunt down his father. While all of this is going on, the employees at Freddy's generally have to, suffer for William's actions, because those are some angry ghost kids. So this all sounds rather simple, right? Like, possessed robots just attacking employees because, they were murdered, and they want justice for their murder. Well, it's not. I technically left out certain details, ones that, while they are heavily agreed upon in the fandom, just don't make much sense to me, and never really have. Remnant is one, for example. I don't understand why it had to be a thing. We could have left it with, regular ghost possession and stuff, but, that's an entire rant for another day. To make matters worse, no one can really agree on, what parts from the books are canon or not. Depending on who you ask, one thing from the books might be canon, another person might say it's not. This is, of course, besides more obvious things from the books. Cough, cough, Fazgoo. And then I learned that there is a game based off of one of the short stories from the books, Into the Pit. Now look, for all I know, maybe this game has nothing to do with the main series. Maybe the lore in this game isn't canon, it's just sort of we're making sort of a separate, game timeline that goes along with the books more. For all I know, that's what's happening. But all I'm saying is that some lines seem to be getting blurred between book and game lore. And I don't like how those lines are blurring. So maybe, perhaps, I got a bit tired of trying to keep up with all the lore. Maybe, just maybe, I decided to see how I'd do things. What I'd do, if you put all this story stuff in front of me. So long story short, I've got a Fnaf rewrite. Now, it's not a security breach rewrite. For starters, at this point it's not much of a consideration here. Pretty much anything past Ultimate Custom Night is basically at the drawing board. While I've got ideas, some more fleshed out, and some less so, none of them are 100% concrete yet. I'll elaborate on those in a different video, however. Not this one. This is just an intro of sorts. And no, this isn't a rewrite of just a single game or a few plot points that make no sense to me personally, as I've seen with other ones. No, it's none of those. I have come up with a rewrite of the entirety of FNAF 1 through Ultimate Custom Night. All from the ground up, with just a few of the basics of the main story. Some examples include the Afton and Emily families, the MCI/missing children's incident, the murders, haunted animatronics, and the employees being the ones who have to deal with the consequences of Mr. Afton's actions. Those are pretty much the main points that I've decided to keep and build everything else up from. Because, those are pretty much the main parts of the story, minus, as I said before, the more complicated bits. However familiar to the canon story this rewrite may be, it's still very different in my opinion, with a lot of major changes to the lore. For example, as you could probably guess from my very, very small mini rant earlier, Remnant no longer exists as a thing in this universe. As I've said before, never really liked Remnant. This is a story about possessed animatronics, ghosts, and murders. We don't need a scientific explanation for how ghosts and stuff works. We could have just left it at, like, regular ghost possession rules of, like, that's just how it works. We didn't need to make it complicated. So long story short, Remnant is going bye-bye. But alongside all of this, well, that's what this video is for. To tell you what's been changed, what's been fleshed out, all that good stuff. Things like the timeline or any more detailed, well, details won't be discussed much in this video. There will be more. There will be more videos that go into, like, all these details and stuff. Some examples of videos I've got include currently going into more detail on the dynamics of the Emily and Afton households and how things escalate for both families as the timeline goes on. Another is going over the MCI and their home lives, going over a general timeline, explaining how the games will be changed in this rewrite, again, only the first game through Ultimate Custom Night, explaining a few side characters who are now important to the plot, Jeremy Fitzgerald and William's victims in 1987, to name a few, and we've got explaining a more detailed version of the timeline, and then finally, at least for now, my concepts for the security breach era. This list does not have all the video ideas I've got, just a few that I know for certain I want to make. So anyway, with all that, prologue to all of this out of the way, you might be asking, so what is different? For starters, the Afton family is bigger now. There are 5 kids in the family instead of only 3. Look, I just find the concept of the Afton family being bigger than it was canonically to be an interesting thought. Like, just what if there were more kids, not just Michael, Elizabeth, and the unnamed crying child? What if there were at least a couple more? These 2 new siblings are going to include a boy named Alexander, aka Alex, who is the oldest son, and Evan, the middle child. No, Evan is not the crying child, he's a different kid altogether. Number 2, there's an actual explanation in lore as for why Mrs. Emily and Mrs. Afton aren't seen or heard from in any of the games. Both are rather simple. Mrs. Emily, named Annabeth, or Anna, and Henry got divorced back in 1980 and are on good terms. Mrs. Afton, named Claire, is unfortunately no longer with us. She passed away in childbirth, giving birth to the youngest child of the Afton family. And speaking of that, number 3, the crying child now has an actual name and a clear role in the story. What is that name and role, you may ask? Well, no problem. I'll tell you. His name is Cassidy, and he is the one William should not have killed. But, I hear you say, why would William kill his son? Well, I'll elaborate on this certain point over the next few videos, but the long story short of it all is, well, basically, Cassidy kinda sort of found out what his father had done to the missing kids, and William needed to keep them quiet. So, just there's that fun fact until that video comes out. Speaking of, the missing kids and Charlie now have more plot relevance as point number 4. I was always a bit upset that the kids, whose deaths practically caused the plot of the games to happen, hardly seemed to have that much relevance to the plot. We didn't even learn their names until the 6th game, and we had to learn Charlie's name through the books. And even then, we hardly know anything about most of them. So you know what? I'm fleshing them out more. Of course, they've also got different names, and are different kids, but they've got plot relevance now. And again, we'll go over this in their respective video on the MCI kids, and what they're all like. Let's see. Point number 5. Sammy is being added back to the lore. Sammy Emily, Charlie's twin brother from the books. This one is purely just because I can. He's plot relevant here because I said so. Moving on, we'll learn how later. Number 6. Most of the sister location animatronics don't exist, and the couple that still do have changed heavily. Along with this, sister location itself has changed drastically. Since sister location is where things kind of started falling apart a bit in terms of how much sense the story was making. In my opinion, I still think Sister Location is cool, just messed some plot parts up and made some things confusing. And so I changed some things up. Circus Baby and Lolbit are the two animatronics that still exist, but they have changed. Circus Baby is now a clown hare named Harriet, and she was an ice cream and sweets vendor for the diner. And Lolbit is still a fox, but is a comedian named Blackjack. In the lore, he had a Vegas sort of theme thanks to Claire, who grew up in Vegas with her father and had always wanted to be a comedian. William had based Blackjack, the animatronic, off of her dream of being a comedian in Vegas. We'll get to that more in the next video. Sister Location, the game, is very different, now taking place in the now abandoned Fredbear's Family Diner, with Mike being hired to watch over the place as a security guard. To give y'all an idea of the plot of Sister Location, until we get to it in that video, imagine Bunny Farm from the Walton Files, but instead of being an arcade game, and also, being Fnaf, it's basically Michael having to work through his trauma while guided by an oddly sentient but not haunted animatronic. To make an analogy for those of you who have seen the Walton Files, Show Bear, that white bear thing from the Walton Files, is to Sophie Walton what Blackjack is to Michael Afton. As I said before, we'll discuss Sister Location in other games, or how they theoretically would exist with rewrite in another video. But for now, there's a short summary for y'all. Number 7, I think, changes to the timeline. This is purely for me to make the timeline how I want it to be and the way I want the events to happen. Basically, make things make more sense. Some examples include Elizabeth's death being first, as well as an utter freak accident, Charlie's murder in the MCI happening pre-1983, the bodies being found in 1985, etc., etc. And then, many other changes that will be explained in future videos. Now, I know some of y'all will see some of my choices for I did in the rewrite and ask, but why though? And the answer will be one of two things, depending. It's either A, because I wanted to, or B, because it makes more sense to me personally. Some answers might be more complicated than either of those, but if they are, then chances are I'll explain them more in the future videos. And with that, you now know a few of the major changes being made in this rewrite. This is just an introduction video, as explained earlier, where I explain a few things and hopefully get some of y'all interested in hearing more. The next video will be one where I elaborate specifically on the Afton and Emily families. It'll also give y'all some ideas on the timeline, even though that's more for a future video. Listen, I love Fnaf as it is. It's an interesting game series. It's just, things get confusing after a while, and trying to make an actual timeline is a nightmare. And so I thought, hey, why not make my own rewrite of the Fnaf lore based off a few of my own ideas and lore stuff? This isn't me saying I hate Fnaf. In my opinion, far from it. I'd almost say, consider this rewrite to be almost a love letter to the games of sorts. Actually, now that I think about it, fun fact, I was kind of inspired to do this video in a way. Mainly with this video by Emma Artley. Well, yes, it is mostly a security breach, right? It made me think, wonder how many people would be interested in hearing some of my ideas for a Fnaf rewrite as well. Even if, they are more than just, they're more just rewriting Fnaf overall and not just security breach. So go check her out and watch some of her videos. I think she's pretty cool. Just feel like mentioning it in this video, because, also because I want more people to see that video, because I think it's cool. So anyway, hope y'all enjoyed this video, and here's to hoping that the next video doesn't take too long. Because boy, I have too many ideas and I need to scream them out to the void where hopefully someone will listen and enjoy my thoughts. Have a nice day/night, y'all, and I'll see you again soon. And also, happy 10th anniversary to Fnaf! The game series is officially 10 years old now. Wow. Just wow. Anyway, like I said, see y'all later.